Sobrang nakakagulat na balita. Grabe, Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro, pinahiya ang China. Nagimbal na ang buong mundo, napataas ng kamay ang China. Ayon sa nakalap nating impormasyon, pinalaga ng China ni Gibo, binira ni Defense Secretary ang Chinese General. Nagulat ang China, sinagot na sila ni Gibo. Sila to nagtatanong, pero sila ito napahiya. Grabe si Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro, pinahiya ang China. Nagimbal na ang buong mundo, napataas ng kamay ang China. Tara panoorin natin.
My question is for Defense Minister of the Philippines. Recently, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Russian-Ukraine war is a proxy war between nuclear powers and needs to be ended. And meanwhile, the United States is selling more arms to this region and setting up more military bases in the Philippines. So, if the proxy war in Europe needs to be ended, are you concerned that a proxy war in Asia might be launched? Thank you.
Now, to our Chinese interlocutors, I shall address you collectively. And thank you for the propaganda spills disguised as questions. First, the comparison between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Let us not forget that while we are members of ASEAN, we are sovereign countries, each with its own territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I am sure that if what China is doing to the Philippines is done to Malaysia or to any ASEAN country, you would see a different reaction. And certainly as an ASEAN brother, the Philippines will stand up with that ASEAN brother in time of need, in support and in defense of what is international law and UNCLOS. As members of UNCLOS, we are all committed to support it. On the dialogue with China, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, the fact that the question was asked in the way it does, it engenders a deficit of trust in China's words vis-a-vis its actions. I just look back to 1995 on a place called Mischief Reef. There were a few bamboo structures erected there, and China said that these were temporary havens for fisherfolk. Now you have an artificial military island, heavily militarized. China says that it has peaceful intentions. Why does it continue to deny the Philippines its rightful provenance under international law and UNCLOS? And as proof of this, we do not stand alone. No country in the world supports the 9-dash line claim of China, or the idea that waters within this 9-dash line are internal waters of China. Several countries in the world, no less than 50, have joined the Philippines in condemning China's behavior in the South China Sea. None have agreed with China, and none has condemned the Philippines for standing up against China in the face of a threat to its territorial integrity and sovereignty, for which I thank the members in this chamber right now for your support. And thus, for dialogue to be effective, it must be coupled with trust. And China has a lot of trust building to do to be an effective negotiating partner in dispute settlement. We have to call a spade a spade. And that's what we see, and that is the biggest stumbling block to dispute resolution or dialogue with China. That deficit of trust, which I think any rational person or any person that is not ideologically biased with freedom of thought and freedom of speech will agree with me. And lastly, external policy sometimes is a mirror of internal conditions, and vice versa. I, for one, cannot trust a country which imposes, represses its own people. I hope I have answered the propaganda to the satisfaction of everyone in this room.
And also from China, Da Pengqi.
Thank you, moderator. First, it's a very brief comment. Actually, I really appreciate the viewpoint made by Deputy Prime Minister from Thailand. He said we should push forward cooperation and unity, not the division. So it is inappropriate for the minister from Lithuania to attach a label on China, and it's clear a rhetoric for division here in Asia. And my question is for the Philippine Secretary of Defense. As we know, both Vietnam and Malaysia have differences with China in South China Sea. Yet, both countries have effectively managed these differences with China. So my question is, why can't the Philippines do the same? And yesterday, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar mentioned he advised your president to engage dialogue and communication with China. So will the Philippines follow his advice and change its current approach to the South China Sea issue? Or does the Philippines intend to act as a proxy for external powers, continue to serve as a shadow in the shadow play, as described by Singapore former Defense Minister An Yong-hun at this year's Munich Security Conference? Thank you.
And from the IISS, Viraj Solanki.
Thank you, John. My question is for the Philippine Secretary of National Defense. You talked of the growing number of flexible and issue and needs-based groupings. And in March of this year, the Philippines Armed Forces Chief called for an expansion of the Squad Minilateral Group of the Philippines, US, Japan, and Australia to include India and South Korea. Does the Philippines still have an aim to expand this group to include these two countries or other countries across the Indo-Pacific region? And how do you see the objectives of this minilateral group expanding over time? Thank you.
And from Myanmar, Sumon Sant.
Thank you, John. To add to the barrage of questions to Defense Minister Teodoro, I wonder if you could, in your answers to all these questions, give your current assessment of progress towards the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea and the degree to which your ASEAN partners are supportive of the Philippines' position and of achieving this long-running and never-ending, seemingly process towards achieving a maritime code of conduct. Mix it, perhaps, with a current snapshot of the pressure, the Chinese pressure that the Philippines is under. We read about it, water cannons and confrontations, but what is happening right now? Do you see it escalating? Is it stabilized? Where is it going? Thank you.
Thank you. And as tactical warning to our panelists, I'll take two more, and then I'll invite them to answer the points made directly to them in the same order in which they spoke, giving a proportionately greater amount of time perhaps to the Minister from the Secretary of Philippines, owing to the amount of questions directed to him. Rangsiman Rome from Thailand.
Thank you. I would like to have a question to the Secretary of National Defense Philippines. First, yes, you will be the chair in the of ASEAN next time. So, how you see the problem in Myanmar, and how you will continue to find a solution for the situation in Myanmar after Prime Minister Anwar. Second, how you see the role of ASEAN for the problem in the South China Sea? How ASEAN can engage with the problem? How we try to find a solution for the South China Sea by the ASEAN platform? And the last, do you see any links between the problem in Myanmar and the problem in South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, before we return to the panel, and we will try another set, Ben Trier.
Thank you, John. Two questions. One question to Secretary Teodoro. Secretary, there has been increased defense cooperation between the Philippines and European countries recently. Do you like to see even more European defense engagement with your country? And if so, in which areas? And to Minister Sakaline, congratulations on the new Indo-Pacific strategy. Do you also see practical potential for defense industrial cooperation with Indo-Pacific powers? And if so, which capability areas might be the most promising? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start with the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Defense of Thailand. There really were basically two questions asked of you, sir. One, is Thailand's friends with everyone doctrine still effective in today's geopolitical landscape, so polarized as it is? And then the second was on how will the Philippines address Myanmar as the next ASEAN chair? So those were the two, I think, principally to you, Deputy Prime Minister. Gilberto?
Let me address the questions by group. First, on ASEAN 2026, I'm not at liberty, unfortunately, to disclose the theme of ASEAN 2026. That will be the province of our Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the President of the Philippines. But it will follow, definitely, with logic, Malaysia's theme of inclusion, inclusivity. I believe ASEAN members take special pains to have a follow-on for sustainability and continuity of themes set by leaderships of the current countries hosts for the following hosts. The other question would be the ASEAN solution to the South China Sea. I think I won't go that far. But what I can say is that ASEAN should not allow other parties to define what ASEAN centrality means, and not to use ASEAN's perceived action or inaction as a wedge to drive divisions amongst us. And we also had a consensus that we are evolving common positions. And the mere fact that we have members in ASEAN with overlapping claims, but we deal with each other in a cooperative and peaceful manner shows one thing. Because of our behavior, we trust each other not to take unfair advantage of the situation. And this is the spirit that must continue in ASEAN. Next would be if the squad is open to admitting more members. I believe that as the Squad matures and gains momentum because of the synergy and the purpose against shared threat actor, a lot of people who may perceive that they are or may be victimized by the aggressive behavior of that threat actor will want to join. And then we cross the bridge when we get there. On defense cooperation with Europe, certainly, because knowledge knows no boundaries, technology knows no boundaries. And as I said earlier, we know the challenges, the threats facing us. We know who are the actors behind it, and the smaller states have an interest to cooperate, to preserve our territorial integrity and sovereignty. And this is the spirit of multilateralism. It should know no borders. However, there should be a common understanding that we fight for the UN Charter and UNCLOS.
Gilberto.
Yes, just on the cyber resilience, I think beyond the technical side, I think the best defense on cyber resilience is discernment by the common people and user, the ability to spot what is real or not. Now, secondly, I totally agree with the gentleman from Cambodia that much attention has been put on the declaration of conduct, which proves one thing: the imminence of Chinese activities causes much concern among ASEAN members that wants to deal with China. But nevertheless, we have to settle our disputes in the spirit of ASEAN, and an ASEAN dispute resolution mechanism, and seeing tangible outcomes from that, precisely because we have overlapping claims, and the fact is we are willing to work in a spirit of trust on settling these disputes, and we want to see this mechanism work. I totally agree that it should be made a forefront of our own internal resilience as a complement to resilience against external factors.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and I hope everyone of our delegates will thank our panelists for their strategic frankness today. Thank you very much. Thank you for delivering the third powerful speech of this morning's plenary. I took away 3 sentences of my own by way of conclusion. 1, small power agency is not a derivative of great power rivalry. 2nd, functional frameworks are needed to link the geographically separate. And 3rd, legal and normative gaps are widening, so international law, indeed the rules-based order, needs to be modernized in order to cope with the new technologies that are interrupting our strategic life. Thank you very much. We'll now move to questions and comments from the floor. Remember the 2-stage step, the badge in, the button on. I'll take 8 or 9 and then come back to the panel, and we'll begin with a young leader from Thailand, Suachatni Sriyai.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions, if you would allow. One is for the Secretary and one is for the Thai DPM. Mr. Secretary Teodoro, as promised, I'm asking this question in the big room. So in 6 months or so, the Philippines will become the ASEAN chair. So what will be the top 3 priorities of the Philippines as the ASEAN chair? And how is the Philippines planning to reconcile the subtle but quite evident issue cleavage between the mainland Southeast Asia and the maritime Southeast Asia? For DPM Phumtham, Thailand's long-held doctrine in cultivating partnership is that we can be friends with everyone and everyone wants to be our friend. In the current polarizing geopolitical landscape and also in the middle of superpower competition, do you think that this doctrine is still working well for Thailand's economic and security prospects, given that President Xi's Southeast Asian visit last month did not include Thailand? And the most recent US presidential visit to Thailand was President Obama over a decade ago. ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you very much. And from Japan, Ryo Aizawa.
Thank you very much. So question to all of you about an adversarial cross-regional cooperation. How do you assess and deal with the growing cooperation among Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea? So especially in the case of China, while it emphasizes its commitment to peaceful development or mutual respect or rules-based international order, but in practice, we have seen actions neither peaceful, neither respectful, nor in line with international laws, from supporting to Russia to cutting off key dialogues. So if this type of things continues, wouldn't we have no choice but to see China as aligning with an axis that seeks to change the status quo by force? For instance, China and Russia in a regional crisis. So I'd love to hear your assessment and plans to deal with adversarial cooperation in this region. And please note that, distinguished panels, this question comes from the next generation inheriting this turbulent security environment. Thank you.
First, cross-regional is not only necessary, but vital. Second, for cross-regional security linkages to be sustainable, you need firm international, global governance and architecture. Fourth, there is a common understanding of the individual, regional, and common threats and challenges that we all face, being security practitioners. And fourth, there are major players that uphold and are significant pillars of the international global rules-based order. And disengagement by any of them would be disastrous for the preservation of peace in areas where there is a condition of peace, and conflict resolution in areas where there is conflict. So I echo the Deputy Prime Minister's words and Dovile's words that we are all interconnected and we must advocate and use our leadership in order to foster connectivity, call out bad behavior, and work together towards working for tangible outcomes in all our talks, as our host, Minister Chan, said. I'll now proceed. In last year's dialogue, President Ferdinand R. Marcos delivered a historic keynote address where he spoke in defense of the rules-based international order. As he aptly put it, for the past 80 years, this rules-based order has allowed our region to flourish. The stability and predictability that it has engendered have been crucial to the success of the stories of our region, be it the post-war revival of Japan, the economic miracles of Korea, and in Southeast Asia, or the rise of China and of India. His words are more relevant in this conference today, following the speeches of President Macron and of Secretary Hegseth. However, we are witnessing the reconfiguration of our global environment, including the political and economic arrangements that emerged after the Second World War. In our interdependent world, ruptures in the international system, wherever they occur, threaten the very security and prosperity of our people. Thus, this topic, it is an honor for me to address. In an era marked by uncertainty, the diffusion of power, and technological disruption, no single region can be viewed in isolation. From the Indo-Pacific to Eastern Europe, from the Middle East to the Arctic, today's security environment is shaped by interlocking dynamics that transcend traditional regional boundaries. Over the last decade, several cross-regional trends have impacted the security of the Philippines and the outlook of Southeast Asia. In 1974, Deng Xiaoping told the UN General Assembly, and I quote, that China is not a superpower, nor will she ever seek to be one, unquote. Over half a century later, it is evident that the Chinese government did not honor Deng Xiaoping's commitment. And the strategic competition between China and the United States increasingly defines our regional, global security environment. However, we must not overemphasize this reality. Doing so unfairly portrays the legitimate actions taken by smaller states, carried out as being carried out at the behest of major powers, as if we were mere pawns with no strategic agency of our own. In that spirit, I would like to reiterate that the Philippine position on the West Philippine Sea is not a function of Sino-American strategic rivalry. Instead, it is caused, no doubt, by the overreach of the Chinese Communist Party, of which the most glaring evidence is the 9, 10, or 11 dash line that has absolutely no basis in international law. Russia's actions in Ukraine and Israel's operation in Gaza have rippled across the commodity and energy markets of Asia. Hence, the consequences of conflicts abroad are felt at home and borne disproportionately by the most vulnerable. Increases in the cost of food affect cash-strapped families, worsening poverty and food insecurity. Spikes in fuel prices impact critical sectors such as agriculture, domestic shipping, and manufacturing. In this context, multilateral institutions have been facing unprecedented scrutiny and at times met with skepticism and frustration for their difficulties in defending international peace and security. The mechanisms and norms of the United Nations have been used to block legitimate measures aimed at preventing acts of aggression and restoring regional order. This highlights the need for a Security Council that is fit for purpose for contemporary geopolitical realities. We have seen an evolution from rigid alliance blocks to flexible issue and needs-based groupings. The shift is exemplified by the Quad, the Security Quad, the AUKUS, as well as the European Union and its outreach to the Indo-Pacific. Such frameworks link geographically distant partners with shared strategic interests, including maritime security, cyber resilience, and the defense of the all-important supply chains. These developments are driven by gridlocks in the decision-making of multilateral organizations. Their slow pace of reforms and their perceived inability to promote cooperation on the most pressing issues confronting their members. Indeed, criticism has been leveled even against ASEAN for its muted response to the illegal activities in the South China Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb, Suez Canal, and the South China Sea issues, to name a few, are not just regional. They are arteries of the global economy. Disruption in any of these maritime corridors triggers ripple effects across continents, impacting trade flows, military deployments, and diplomatic posture. The Philippines has migration and mobility linkages in these choke points. Over 1 million Filipinos are living and working in the Middle East and North Africa. Thus, instability in those regions pose risks to their lives, their safety and livelihoods. Our seafarers, in particular, are vulnerable to piracy and armed robbery at sea, be it in the Red Sea or in the Horn of Africa. Therefore, the safety of our citizens, wherever they may be, is among our utmost priorities. Technological development signifies progress, undoubtedly. However, technologies are merely tools. While they should be a force for good, they can also be exploited by malevolent actors. Thus, cyber operations launched in one hemisphere may and do paralyze infrastructure in another. Disinformation campaigns originating in one region may shape electoral outcomes in a completely different theater. Damage to submarine cables and other critical underwater infrastructure in one area may affect millions across the world. However, despite the recognized importance of these issues, response has been undoubtedly and undeniably slow. Legal and normative gaps are widening, whether in the enforcement of cyber legislation, the protection of critical underwater infrastructure, the regulation of artificial intelligence, or the issue of lethal autonomous weapons systems. The development and, yes, enforcement, more importantly, the enforcement of international legal frameworks lag behind the pace of innovation, adoption, and adaptation. Overall, these cross-regional trends feed into the reconfiguration of our geopolitical landscape, which is shaped not by lines drawn on a map, but by the flows of power, influence, technology, and information. To think regionally is no longer sufficient, but to act globally without understanding local contexts is equally dangerous. Thus, regional organizations, including ASEAN, have been struggling to align with extra-regional actors on common priorities. Coordination across different political systems and strategic cultures is increasingly difficult, with failure to gain consensus being a norm rather than an exception. This engenders concern about the unity and effectiveness and continued relevance of our multilateral institutions. In this light, I humbly propose some recommendations as a suggested collective way forward. Of course, we must enhance cross-regional security cooperation. Among the concrete measures we can take are joint strategic dialogues, such as trilateral or quadrilateral summits among regional blocs on shared security concerns. To this end, ASEAN must definitely strengthen and leverage its dialogue partnerships, including those with the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Another potential area of convergence is the development of shared legal frameworks and cooperative enforcement. This includes the promotion of international conventions and regional alignment on laws protecting critical infrastructure, such as submarine cables. Second, we must pursue reforms in the United Nations. There is a need to curtail the use of the inordinate use of the veto, as its exercise may serve to be a hindrance to the interests of smaller states, especially those besieged by larger ones, who may have the power of the veto. Beyond the veto, we support broader reforms to the Security Council, including enlarging its membership for greater representation in the UN system. For our part, we will continue advocating for constructive solutions if the Philippines is elected as a non-permanent member for the term of 2027 to 2028. President Xi Jinping has declared that, quote, China must lead the reform of the global governance system with concepts of fairness and justice, unquote. However, what the Chinese government considers fair and just may stand in stark contrast to the norms and values accepted by the rest of the world, especially the smaller countries. To envision a China-led international order, we only need to look at how they treat their much smaller neighbors in the South China Sea, which runs counter to the, quote, peaceful rise they, unquote, they initially promised. Last year, the Philippines hosted the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction with delegations from nearly 70 countries, including those from Europe, the Middle East, the North America, and South America. This demonstrates that in certain issues, the international community can still and do come back together to tackle challenges that respect neither borders nor boundaries. So there is hope. Just last month, we attended the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial, where we pledged to increase our contributions to peacekeeping missions to foster just and sustainable peace across the world. Ultimately, multilateral solutions are required to address global challenges, including climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, and the protection of the rights of migrants and seafarers. Thus, amidst a growing disillusionment, some sectors with multilateralism, we can and we must reverse course. Before I close, there is an issue we need to address. We are all here as stewards of our country's provenance and our country's collective responsibility towards maintaining global peace and security. I was just talking to future youth leaders. However, we must realize that the gap between the educated and the uneducated is widening in the world. And countries need to address this gap, because a populace which is unable to perceive the benefits of multilateralism, that lose the facility of critical thinking, are easy bait for one-liners, disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda, which may run counter to general peace and stability of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a global transformation. Still, we must ensure that our international system, however it evolves, remains grounded in the rule of law, the undistorted rule of law, particularly the United Nations Charter, which respects the political independence, territorial integrity, and notional sovereign equality of all states. Evidently, this system has not always functioned well. However, for all its shortcomings, there is no preferable alternative to the rules-based order, especially for the security, prosperity, and survival of smaller states like the Philippines. Thank you and good morning.
Ngayon, ikaw, bilang Pilipino, ano ang masasabi mo at reaksyon sa balitang ito? Mag-iwan ka ng komento sa ibaba at atin pong babasahin isa-isa.